For the first time since 1994, the Gambia yesterday submitted its state report to the African Commission at the 64th Ordinary Session in Egypt. UN Secretary General has reiterated that when media workers are targeted, societies as a whole pay a price. Trump signed new rules for asylum seekers, making it more difficult and more expensive. These are the headlines. More coming on your way on The World Today on IFTV.
It's 8:30 p.m. in Istanbul, 10:30 a.m. in Washington State, 17:30 GMT here in the Gambia. You're watching The World Today Afternoon Bulletin. We now take a look at our first story. Another batch of 30 officers from the Gambia Police Intervention Unit graduated on Friday after successfully completing a 2-week-long training on police movement and tactics ahead of the much-anticipated organization of the Islamic Conference Summit to be held in Banjul. The graduation ceremony was held at the PIU headquarters in Kanifing. The course was coordinated by the Turkish Department of Protection in the context of international cooperation on police training. Saja Sambu was there and now files in this report.
Ahead of the OIC summit expected to be held in Banjul this year, the Gambia Internal Security, the police have been busy training her men on various areas of security. The latest delivered 30 police officers of both men and women trained on police movement and tactics under the broadband public order through the long-standing Friends of the Gambia, the Republic of Turkey, facilitated by the Turkish Embassy in Banjul. Speaking on behalf of the instructors, Safa Kurukusos said even though the training was difficult, they managed to see it out.
Buraya gelirken bazı çekincelerimiz vardı. Nasıl olacak? İyi bir ders geçecek mi bizim için, onlar için verimli olacak mı diye.
Yeah, so there have been a little bit of concerns before they came. How are they going to do things? How is the class going to proceed?
Beklediğimizin daha üstünde bir performansla karşılaştık burada.
Yeah, but then it's been a great time basically.
Öğrenciler gayet derse katılımları, onların yaptığımız hareketlere uyumluluğu gayet iyiydi.
Yeah, so he's sending you appreciations to all the trainees for their participation and active understanding of all the lessons.
The former police inspector and now the advisor to the Ministry of Interior, Yankuba Sonko, believe this training wouldn't have come at a better time, especially when the Gambia is faced with the young democracy.
This particular course, the participants will bear witness to me that it is very, very important to them in these trying times of our security, more especially in a democratic society. Public management in a democratic society are a lot of issues that one has to look at. One, you have to look at whether it is necessary. Necessity is there, reasonableness is there, proportionality is there. If you are faced with any public management issue, is it even necessary for you to be there? That's the first thing that you think about. When you are there, is it reasonable to use force? Is the force used that you are using, is it reasonable? Is this proportionate or equivalent to the force that is, force against you? If all these questions are in the negative, then you should not be there.
The public relations officer of the OIC Secretarial, Isa Abubakar said at the OIC they are aware of the significant role and challenges faced by the police, and they will give support when needed in traveling.
I understand also that I'll take the opportunity. There are frustrations sometimes during travels. The rest assured that Mr. Sonko can bear the witness. I do my best to whatever we can do to support. But the OIC also has other institutions waiting for us to help, Department of Health. But this one, let me tell you one thing, I'm not being diplomatic here, I'm being very honest. The public, after testing the pulse of society, what people say is that you are the most active apparatus as far as preparing the OIC and other matters. The public see.
For his part, the Turkish ambassador to the Gambia, Safa Ismail Yusa, said the Gambia is lucky to have training from the Turkish police. He further said they are aware that such training of 1 or 2 weeks is not enough for the Gambia, for which he assured of the Turkish government support.
As a matter of fact, the Gambian police, I mean, all you trainees are very lucky, to get, some inspiration from the Turkish police. Of course, these training programs, within 2 weeks or 1 week or a few days, will not be sufficient, for the Gambian police. But this is an ongoing process, the cooperation between Turkish police and the Gambian police is very fruitful, as the former IG, Mr. Sonko, knows it. In the last 2 decades, our cooperation between Turkish National Police and the Gambian police, it varied from the exchange of materials to training programs, capacity building programs. For that reason, our support behind the Gambian police will continue incessantly, and we will continue to support our brothers and sisters here.
It could be recalled that this is the latest training among the series of training received by the Gambian police from the Turkish government, and more are on the pipeline, as this is a pilot project ahead of the organization of Islamic Conference Summit to be held later this year in Banjul. Sajo Sambu for iAfrica TV News.
Saja Sambu there on the graduation of PIU officers after completion of a 2-week training, all part of OIC's summit preparations. The Secretary General of the United Nations expressed deeply troubled by the growing number of attacks and the culture of impunity around the world. In his message on World Press Freedom Day, Antonio Guterres revealed that almost 100 journalists were killed in 2018. Hundreds are imprisoned with anti-media rhetoric on the rise. So too are violence and harassment against journalists, including women. A free press is essential for peace, justice, sustainable development, and human rights. Here is the message in this insert.
A free press is essential for peace, justice, sustainable development, and human rights. No democracy is complete without access to transparent and reliable information. It is the cornerstone for building fair and impartial institutions, holding leaders accountable, and speaking truth to power. And this is especially true during election seasons, the focus of this year's World Press Freedom Day. Facts, not falsehoods, should guide people as they choose their representatives. Yet, while technology has transformed the ways in which we receive and share information, sometimes it is used to mislead public opinion or to fuel violence and hatred. Civic space has been shrinking worldwide at an alarming rate. And with anti-media rhetoric on the rise, so too are violence and harassment against journalists, including women. I am deeply troubled by the growing number of attacks and the culture of impunity. According to UNESCO, almost 100 journalists were killed in 2018. Hundreds are imprisoned. And when media workers are targeted, societies as a whole pay a price. On World Press Freedom Day, I call on all to defend the rights of journalists whose efforts help us to build a better world for all. Thank you.
Secretary General Antonio Guterres emphasizing the need for press freedom in his message on World Press Freedom Day. For the first time since 1994, the Republic of the Gambia has submitted its first state report on the African Charter on Human and People's Rights to the African Commission, as well as its initial report on the African Charter on the Rights of Women in Africa at the 64th Ordinary Session of the Commission in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. The Gambia had not submitted any report over the past 25 years. This report constituted a combined report for all the previous 12 reports due for submission. The delegation to Egypt was led by the Attorney General and Minister of Justice, Honorable Abubakar Tambedo. Ismail Sonko has more.
The Republic of the Gambia has achieved a historical milestone yesterday for the first time since 1994. It submitted its four-step report on the African Charter on Human and People's Rights to the African Commission as well as its initial report on the African Charter on the Rights of Women in Africa Nepeto Protocol at the 64th Ordinary Section of the Commission in Sham El Sahed, Egypt. Pursuant to Article 62 of the African Charter, all state parties are expected to submit a report of their human rights situation to the Commission every 2 years. Since the Gambia had not submitted any report over the past 25 years, this report constituted a combined report for all the previous 12 reports due for submission. In presenting the report, the Attorney General highlighted the human rights challenges of the Gambia since 1994, which provided the backdrop and context of the 25 years old backlog of its reporting obligation to the Commission. He elaborated on the key constitutional and legislative, institutional and policy reform currently being undertaken by the government of the Gambia. Attorney General and Minister of Justice Bokar Tamberu headed a 6-man government delegation consisting of the Solicitor General Chorna Marina, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Health, Mohamed Jede, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Human and Children and Social Welfare, Boludiba, the Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Basic and Secondary Education, Jere Sanyang, and State Council Bafo Jeng. Also in attendance from the Gambia were the chairperson of a commissioner of the newly established National Human Rights Commission of the Gambia, Mr. Manuel D. Diouf and Mr. Njuni Dram respectively. Reporting for iAfrica TV, this is Ismaila Sonko.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has appeared flanked by soldiers at an army base in Caracas in a show of defiance towards his opponents. Mr. Maduro called on the armed forces to defeat any coup plotter following 2 days of clashes between opposition and pro-government forces. Opposition leader Juan Guaido tried on Wednesday to spark a military rebellion and force Mr. Maduro from office. Mr. Guaido has urged the public employees to strike to undermine the government, but Mr. Maduro praised the army's loyalty, saying no one dare touch their sacred ground or bring war to Venezuela.
Venezuela's president appeared with soldiers at a military base in the capital Caracas following an alleged coup attempt by the opposition leader. In a speech to soldiers, Nicolas Maduro called on the Bolivarian National Armed Forces to reunite for the Venezuelan constitution, peace and democracy. In front of the world, the Bolivarian National Armed Forces has to give a historic lesson at this time that in Venezuela, there is a consistent, legal, cohesive and united armed forces to defeat attempted coup plotters who sell themselves to Washington's dollars, Maduro said. The future of Venezuela must be in peace, prosperity, employment, and in confronting the difficulties we have and overcoming them, he added. The president worked with soldiers after his speech in a bid to display the military support to him. Maduro took part in chants with the soldiers, lending the rally in an overall festive atmosphere. In a statement by the country's Ministry of Defense, Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez and more than 4,500 military personnel participated in the march. Meanwhile, Venezuela's top court issued an arrest warrant Thursday for Leopoldo Lopez, a prominent opposition leader who is accused of being part of a movement to oust President Nicolas Maduro. He initially sought refuge in the Chilean embassy with his wife and daughter, but they later decided to move to the Spanish embassy, said Chilean Foreign Minister Roberto Ampuero. After days of upheaval, the streets of Caracas were calm despite Juan Guaido's call for public employees to stage strikes to put pressure on President Nicolas Maduro. Violence erupted in the capital Caracas on Tuesday after opposition leader Juan Guaido called for a massive uprising against Maduro. The turmoil continued on Wednesday and Thursday. The clashes between Venezuelan security forces and Guaido's supporters in La Victoria and Caracas have left 4 dead, the Venezuelan Observatory of Social Conflict announced. More than 200 people, including security officers, were shot and wounded during the violence.
Following a shocking series of recent attacks of temples, churches and mosques in various parts of the world, a 3-day summit to establish international guidelines for combating hate speech and to protect religious minorities concluded at the United Nations in Geneva. Adama Dieng, Under Secretary General and Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, told journalists that the focus of the summit was to connect various relevant stakeholders, diplomats, politicians, religious leaders, academics, and civil society for a plan of action to better protect minorities.
We are speaking about peace. We are speaking about justice. speaking about strong institutions. And when we see the climate around the world today, just a couple of days ago, we witnessed the horrific attack of a synagogue in the United States. Just before that, we had a church burned in Burkina Faso. We had also mosque attack in New Zealand. We had Sri Lanka. So what's wrong in this? The extreme right wing. But what are the others doing? They need to be more speaking out. They should be better mobilized. But sometimes you see also the political opportunism, even in those camps. So this is a matter which needs to be addressed. And particularly, as I said today, in Europe. The signs of the 30s are resurfacing. And we need to bring to an end the cynical politicians' discourse. I mean, no migrants, no refugees is responsible of what is happening, of their failing their economy or whatever. The big massacres start always with small action and language. No one would forget that the Holocaust was preceded by hate speech, hate crimes. When the Jews were being dehumanized, named after animals' names. We witnessed the same in Rwanda, when the Tutsis were dehumanized, named after animals' names, Tankrala, snake. So that was the beginning of the genocide. It started with those words. And what we are seeing today is pretty close.
Coming up after the break, Prime Minister Theresa May's Conservative Party had performed badly in UK local elections, losing ground to Liberal Democrats. Welcome back. We remind you that you're watching the World Today Afternoon Bulletin. Let's now take a look at the remaining stories. UK voters are fed up with the political impasse in Westminster nearly 3 years after the referendum to leave the European Union lashed out at both the Conservatives and Labour in local elections. Instead, they gave their support to smaller parties that offered any sort of alternative. The Conservatives had performed badly across the board, losing ground in both Remain voting areas, which backed at the Tories' hard line on Europe. The Liberal Democrats, on the other hand, made major gains, taking over many councils once led by the Tories and the Labour.
The ruling Conservative and the opposition Labour parties suffered heavy losses in Thursday's English local council elections as voters punished them over the Brexit impasse. The Liberal Democrats, on the other hand, made major gains, taking over many councils once led by the Tories and the Labour. Their victory represents a shift in public opinion as voters turned away from Britain's two major parties. The Green Party and Independents also made gains. I don't think people are happy. The people that voted to remain blame us for leaving, and the people that voted to leave blame us because we haven't left yet. Tim Warren, a defeated Tory councillor, told the Guardian Daily. I think it's almost anti-political. I think a lot of people didn't turn out, and I think they want to punish us for a lack of action in government, if I am honest, he added. Looking at the most gains and losses by the numbers, the Tories lost 329 local council seats, while Labour lost 80. The Liberal Democrats, however, won 228 seats, with the Green Party gaining 33 and Independents winning 181. The local elections are seen as a referendum on the major parties' handling of Brexit, and the Liberal Democrats' gains point to voters turning their backs on the UK's two main parties.
A UN spokesperson said the hostilities in Tripoli are continuing to impact health facilities and health personnel. Speaking to reporters, UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said there have been at least 4 fatalities among health workers since the beginning of this current conflict, and 11 ambulances have to date been damaged or destroyed as a result of the hostilities.
Our colleagues on the ground tell us that hostilities in Tripoli continue to impact health facilities and health personnel. There have been at least 4 fatalities among health workers since the beginning of this current conflict, and 11 ambulances have to date been damaged or destroyed as a result of the hostilities. The armed clashes, random shelling, and explosives placed on roads are hampering the ability of humanitarian workers to evacuate civilians and to deliver needed aid, as well as the ability of civilians to move freely to safer areas or to be able to access vital goods and services. We are also continue to remind all parties of their obligations under international humanitarian law to take constant care to spare civilians and civilian infrastructure, including medical personnel and medical or health facilities. Since the beginning of the conflict, 102 civilian casualties have been verified, including 23 fatalities, and over 45,000 people have now fled their homes due to the clashes, and that's according to the UN Migration.
In his latest attempt to slow the flood of Central American migrants pouring across the southern border, President Donald Trump proposed sweeping new rules for asylum seekers that would make it more difficult and more expensive for them to seek refuge in the U.S. In a presidential memorandum signed earlier this week, Trump gave the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security 90 days to implement the changes in an effort to stem what he described as an asylum crisis that has been plagued by rampant abuse. The rules would
US
for the first
President
time
Donald
require
Trump's
asylum seekers to pay an application fee, deny work permits for asylum seekers, and enter the country illegally, and require government officials to fast-track new asylum hearings to complete them within 180 days.
US President Donald Trump's administration has announced major changes to how Washington approaches asylum cases, introducing a fee for applications and limiting access to work authorizations. Trump has been vocal about the rising number of asylum cases in the US, and this is the latest move by the administration to attempt to curtail the number of people who try to apply for asylum in the country. In a memo issued to the Attorney General, Trump called for policies to be developed to see through asylum applications within 180 days, set a fee for asylum applications, bar anyone who has entered or attempted to enter the U.S. illegally from getting a work permit before any protection is given. Trump gave the Attorney General and the head of Homeland Security 90 days to fulfill the policy request. The purpose of this memorandum is to strengthen asylum procedures to safeguard our system against rampant abuse of our asylum process, it read. The president also made reference to his national emergency declaration, which he used to bypass Congress to get funding for his border war with Mexico. That emergency continues to grow increasingly severe, the memo read. The UN responded to Trump's memo saying that all asylum seekers have basic rights when it comes to the asylum process. Those rights are enshrined in various international instruments and they should be respected, Stefan Dujarric, spokesman for the UN Secretary General, said in a news conference. In March, 92,607 migrants were apprehended by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, with the majority being family units.
President Donald Trump said to minimize the migration rate at all costs, with the latest being his proposal of new rules for asylum seekers. Well, viewers, that's all we have for you on the World Today Afternoon Bulletin. For more on these and other stories, log on to our website, iafrica.tv. I am Fatoumata Jajo. Bye for now. over electoral rigging rocks Zimbabwe as the country.
Yesterday,